Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about the Igarashi Japanese natural whetstone. Sometimes this whetstone is also called Ikarashi. It can be spelled with a K or a G, Igarashi, Ikarashi. There's no really right or wrong way to spell it. The different spelling comes from phonetic differences around Japan and how you might pronounce the original name. So this is a Nakatoishi whetstone, which comes out of Niigata, Sanjo, Japan. It is a stone analogous to about the 2,000 to 3,000 grit range. However, one of the things that is interesting about this type of whetstone is there are three distinct types, which all can be sold under the same name or similar names. So the coarsest Igarashi is looks different than this. It is usually a very white or very gray color. It looks a lot like Amakusa Shiro, but it will not have the gray dots within its structure. And the biggest difference between coarse Ikarashi and the what we call like the standard or better quality Igarashi, which is this right here, is it will have a very porous, hole-covered composition. So when you look at it, you'll see, little holes dotting, or little too large holes dotting its surface, which makes it look like those Amakusa composition stones. So if you look at an Amakusa stone, you definitely, at least like an Amakusa Akai or Amakusa Redstone, you're going to see that it has holes in it. And if you find Ikarashi, which also has holes in it, you will know that it is the coarser version of Igarashi, and arguably the lower quality version. It's just less likely to be consistent. Usually when we say Igarashi, we're talking about this type of a stone. The coarse ones are less common to find in general. And there are actually two forms of this Igarashi as well. They're fairly similar though. One you will hear referred to as what we've been talking about, Igarashi. Just default that, which are these type of stones. There's also a second stone that is an Igarashi stone called a Kasabori. The Kasabori stones are old Igarashi stones mined out of a mine specifically in Kasabori. It is about southeast of Niigata, where these stones come from. And they are related. They perform fairly similarly. They have some visual characteristics which are similar. They share most visual characteristics, but the Kasabori does have some differences in both how it performs and how it looks. So I do not have a Kasabori stone, nor do I think I will ever be taking the time to track one down. So I will just run through that in this video. So what we're going to do is we're going to just take a quick look at this Igarashi here, and then I'll explain what a Kasabori might look like. So let's go ahead and do that. The differences between a modern, a 1980s or sooner or more recent mined Igarashi and a Kasabori, which is before 1980, it's the old mine that's been exhausted, is the Kasabori will be a lot harder than the Igarashi, which we would call the Kasabori a Igarashi Kasabori. But typically when you find them from collectors or in the marketplace, people will just axe the Igarashi to try to avoid confusion, but it is a Igarashi Kasabori stone. This is just an Igarashi stone. That's the proper names. Nonetheless, you will see that it has a lot of similarities between the Igarashi stone, but it's going to have additional visual compositions. So I'm actually going to switch this out for the more standard looking Igarashi. This is probably the most common looking one that I have that has the standard visual attributes. Some of the standard visual attributes that an Igarashi and a Igarashi Kasabori can share are these blue lines here that are within a whitish emerald structure. It might not look emerald right now on the video, but once I wet it, you'll see. So I'll go ahead and wet that so we can take a look. As you can see, they're fairly thirsty stones. Kasaboris are also thirsty stones, but the Kasabori will be harder. than the Igarashi. So as you can see, when we wet it, it turns an emerald color here, a very deep emerald color, and it will suck up that water. An Igarashi Kasabori will likely have similar lines as these two within its structure. These like green, dark emerald lines are very common for Igarashi and are present in only really Igarashi or Igarashi Kasabori stones. Now, what the Kasabori will have that modern Ikarashi will almost never have is feldspar spots. Now, typically when we think of feldspar spots within the surface of a whetstone, we actually think of Aizu. Aizu or Aizu. Aizu is also a Nakatoishi. I'll have a separate video on it later, so we're not going to go into its performance or anything like that today. But what we will cover is that the two of these share a geological fault line. They are, siblings, if you want to call it that. Fukushima, where the Aizu is from, is close to Nagata. It is further southeast compared to Nagata, and it is still east of Kasabori. But they are all created by the same geological event. But they perform different based on the geological impacts per the regions that each of those towns or mine locations are from. So let's go ahead and wet both, and you will see that when you're comparing the two, which if you use these two stones, you would not mix them up, but visually some people will mix them up. The first thing you'll notice is that the Igarashi is a much deeper emerald color. The Aizu is not. The Aizu typically is a grayish blue. Maybe if I get it to the same level, is typically a grayish blue in color, versus the Ikarashi is again this blue-green emerald color that we talk about. However, these white dots that we can see within the surface of our Aizu here are what we would find in Kasabori Igarashi. So the Kasabori Igarashi would look almost exactly like this Igarashi, but it would have these white feldspar spots in it. So when you're looking at old stones, trying to compare a Aizu to a Kasabori to an Igarashi and figure out what you have, that can kind of be your guide there, right? You have your Igarashi on the far left, which is very emerald, typically has these green lines that run through it. It'll be the softer of all three of them typically, and also a little bit the coarsest. You have your Kasabori in the middle. Kasabori can be as coarse as Igarashi, equal to Aizu, or even maybe a little finer than Aizu. Kasabori has a very wide range, so it totally depends on the stone. And then you have but the Kasabori will have typically these spots mixed with these visual attributes. So green lines, heavy emerald color, deep emerald color when it's wet, but the white spots. And then the Aizu is less likely to be greenish, more likely to be blue-gray, have these white spots as well. But if you see these green lines, it is very unlikely to be an Aizu. And you definitely see a lot of vendors out there who aren't familiar with the breakdown between these three stones selling Ikarashi Kasabori as old stock as Aizu, and it is not. It does not perform the same. They should not be sold interchangeably, and Aizu is more desirable. It's a more consistent stone, less likely to have impurities, with a maybe more desirable coarseness to consistency pattern. But nonetheless, they all can have their place. They could all be used together. So I'm going to put the Aizu aside. We'll take a more close look at this Ikarashi. So you can see that I've had to apply water a few times. Originally the goal there was to give you a just visual idea of what the stone looked like. However, it is also a thirsty stone, so that is also necessary. Similar to the other videos, we're going to use a 140 Atoma diamond plate to just get a little bit of slurry going. This stone is soft enough to where we actually don't need to use an Atoma. It would self-slurry, but I do prefer the Atoma because it just speeds things up a little bit. lending to its softness. You can see that I really didn't do a whole lot there, and we have more than enough slurry to work with to begin what we're doing with. So we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of polishing on our knife here to give it to give you guys a reference as to what it looks like. I'll go ahead and show you what the default looks like. You know, I just kind of cleaned it up a little bit so that what scratches we see are primarily from our Igarashi stone. Let's go ahead and spend a little bit of time on this. So as far as whetstones go, natural whetstones in the Nakatoishi range, this is about middle ground in all manners. It's middle ground hardness, softness, middle ground fineness, middle ground cutting speed. As you can see, we are definitely getting metal material, but it's not blazing fast. It is a fairly comparable stone to binsui. Usually it's a little bit finer than binsui, and it cuts a little bit slower than binsui, and it's a little softer than binsui. I prefer it to binsui. I like that it's a little softer, easier to work with. I do like that it's a little finer, but I find that it's within a easy standard deviation of binsui, so it can serve the same purpose to erase the same scratches. And they're fairly price compatible. This might be a little bit more expensive than binsui, but usually you get a larger stone for it. I do find that binsui handles harder steel faster. This can do all the steels. I know that there's some information out there which says Ikarashi isn't as good for hard steels and people prefer it for stainless. I've never personally experienced that problem. I find it works on HRC 90 or 65 as it does 58. But the binsui is faster, is a faster cutter for it. So you got to pick what you like. They're both fun to try. So hopefully this video will help you figure out which one you'd prefer. So let's go ahead and we'll just do one more. Then we'll take a look after I dry it off. All right. And as with the rest of these videos that are just kind of quick looks at stones, it's never going to be perfect. It's not a perfect polish. That's not really what we're going for. It's to give you a relative approximation of the scratch pattern that it provides on the knife. You can see we have some unevenness here, some unevenness in the middle. That's just, we've only spent 5 minutes on the stone. If we kept going, a lot of that stuff would even out. And if maybe I was paying a little bit more attention instead of talking, it would probably be a better job too. So we'll try to get closer here. And this time I might try to use autofocus at some point, because I can't always get it to be a really nice picture for you on the video. Let's see what autofocus can do. All right. So that's what it generally looks like. You get a scratch pattern on both your core steel and your cladding. It's a very fine scratch pattern on the core steel. You're starting to get to the deletion of those scratches at this level. So the next steps up, when we hit Aizu and other stones, we'll see it more and more diminish until it goes away entirely. And even on our cladding, we still definitely have a definitive scratch pattern, but it's getting decent looking. If we kept on this stone, cleaned it up with some finger stones, you could have a very workable polish if you wanted to. So let's go ahead and just take a moment, and we will also sharpen with this, since it is most certainly suitable for both applications. So maybe one of its biggest downfalls is that it's such a thirsty stone. You could soak it. If you seal it up like I have it, where it's all the sides, you could soak it for 5 minutes before you use it. That'll cool down its thirst quite a bit. It's okay, we've definitely made a burr. This is about HRC 61 to 62. So it's not a super hard steel, but it's on the harder side of things, and I probably made a burr before before that whole session was done. And it's a fairly toothy finish. I mean, any Nakatoishi is going to leave a toothy burr. Obviously, all burrs are going to be a little toothy. You get my point, though. If we just knock it off here. So we knocked that off, and it's a nice edge. It definitely has that finish you would want for vegetables. I would not look at this stone for finishing kitchen knives that are doing raw protein or slices that you want to look beautifully clean on the plate. But insofar as just having an extremely usable edge you can get quickly with a versatile stone, I think this one does a pretty good job. And in my personal lineup, I am probably going to knock Bin Sui out totally in favor of these Ikarashi. I just find they cover the bases better for me, and I prefer using them, but I think they're fairly interchangeable. Both stones can kind of fill in the same role. Again, these will be a little bit finer, so maybe if you have your synthetic going to 1,000 or 1,200 before you jump to natural stones, this one might serve you better than Bin Sui. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Hope this allowed you to see a little bit about the stone and how it performs, and make your own choices regarding these lesser known but still very fun and worth having Japanese Nakatoishi whetstones. Anyway, until next time.